أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين الحمد لله رب العالمين. This is the second session for talking about the Qurb of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll take up any questions or any comments from last session or completions from last session, now all the way to around 8:50. And then from 8:50 to 9:45, we'll continue with course content and basically case studies. If there's less questions or not many questions from the previous session, then we'll continue, inshallah, with the course content. I got some questions via email and some via personal text or messages from the people that knew me. I've posted, I'm going to share with you 2 such questions. If somebody has more than that and they would like to share them, they could type the questions here. I'll open the chat, or they could speak up as well, and we can try to see if we can answer some of those questions again from last session. One of the questions that was asked was that during the daily prayer, we have this niyyah of qurbatan ilallah. How does this apply with this particular qurb of this particular course? And that's a very good question. That if we, whenever we do our mustahab actions and whenever we do our ritual prayers and ritual salats and so on and so forth, we get asked. We've been told to have a niyat of qurbatan ilallah, or wajib qurbatan ilallah, mustahab qurbatan ilallah. At the end of it, it's always qurbatan ilallah, with the proximity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So exactly as we discussed, these prayers, these ibadat that we have specific in our deen are meant as a tool, specific tool, very special tool that brings the tawajjuh of man, brings the attentiveness of man towards the top-down relationship that pre-exists. Okay? So these prayers that could have been formulated all in the morning or in the nighttime, right? They could have been done such that there was only one prayer in the day. Rather, the way the methodology of the prayer is that there are 5 different prayers at different times of the day. Okay, we've been given some leniency to clump some of them together. But at the very least, there are still 3 major chunks of our times in our day that we spend time to pray, right? So these prayers, according to tradition, one of the consequences of these prayers is to hold up our day, be like pillars for our day, right? What are they holding up and what are they being pillars towards? Exactly that, the tawajjuh towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So these 5 daily prayers even then become a specified time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, listen, at the very least, this is what I wish. I wish for the abd, my abd, to come and pray, and whilst in prayer, rasman, officially have the tawajjuh towards Allah in these particular manners. Now the difference between us trying to get the tawajjuh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the 24 hours versus the tawajjuh we give in our prayers, there's a slight difference. Difference is that the actions within the prayer are ones that are also top down, right? The methodology within that particular prayer are also ones that are top down. What do I mean by that? Well, when you're praying as per the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? At the time that He dictated. You stop doing things that you were allowed to do before, right? And you start to perform physical actions exactly as He wills you to. You recite exactly what He asks you to, and you can't deter from that. So while you're in the middle of prayer, you can't speak on your own free will about other than what He's allowed you to speak. Okay? So you're following an entirely top-down worship where every aspect of it has been dictated for you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this particular manner, this becomes the apex of now the tawajjuh, where you're saying that not only am I trying to be attentive towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the top-down, pre-existing top-down relationship, rather in this particular action, the action itself is such that it is determined for me. prescribed for me. It's not a self-prescription. Whereas in our 24 hours, the method by which we go about getting tawajjuh and the levels we increase in the tawajjuh, right? Those methodologies, those actions, although generally prescribed by the Ahlul Bayt and the Deen to have tawajjuh of Allah in the 24 hours in every aspect of our life and so on and so forth, but there is no set form to them. It's not a top-down form related to those. Okay. The second question that I was asked, which I thought was very, very important to discuss, is that there are certain ahadiths which talk about the primary methods of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. In Hadith al-Mi'raj, there's two Hadith al-Mi'raj. There's one Hadith al-Mi'raj which talks about how the journey went about. The Holy Prophet went from place A to place B, then from place B to place C, and so on and so forth. And then how he came back and what are the signs that he gave of Mi'raj and so on. So this is one Hadith al-Mi'raj. There's also a time where the Holy Prophet reaches in his journey of Mi'raj a point when he is no longer accompanied by Angel Jibreel. And then a very special conversation happens between the Holy Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. This second Hadith al-Mi'raj now quotes that particular conversation. But the Holy Prophet comes back and then relays by means of Imam Ali alayhi salam that special conversation that takes place between the Holy Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that special moment and special conversation between, the Abd of Allah, the apex of the Abd of Allah and Allah Himself, right? There's certain information given to the Holy Prophet. One of them is that Allah asks him to have taqarrub of him, to come close to Allah. And the Holy Prophet doesn't just say yes, he asks, how should I come close to you? Okay. And in response, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches the Holy Prophet what means are the best means to get close to him. And in those, what has been said is that by means of making your night your day and your day your night. And the Holy Prophet asks, what does that mean that I should make my night my day and my day my night? And Allah responds as well. Allah says that just like in the night time when you go to sleep, well, your stomach is empty, right? You feel that hunger within you because your stomach, you're not consistently trying to eat. So when you wake up, you realize that hunger, right? Because of the emptiness that pre-existed within your stomach. So when you wake, he explains that when you're saying that make your day your night, means that take very little in terms of food for your day. Meaning try to feel a hunger in the daytime. Okay. And the second thing that the Holy Prophet is told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is make your night your day. Well, a day is a time when you go and try to attain your sustenance for this dunya, right? You go work and so on and so forth. You're saying this night, make it a day, meaning try to attain certain sustenances for your spiritual self at this time. So he's talking about the Salatul Layl at its apex. But not the Salatul Layl's apex as just the 11 rak'at, right? Much more than that. But will suffice for this particular notion that even though this tawajjuh of Allah, having this tawajjuh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that recognizing the top-down pre-existing relationship, it's granted a boost, really, right? By two very specific means. One means is that of, as the ahadith mentioned, is that by means of a remembrance and tawajjuh at a time when a person is not preoccupied with other things, so night time. And what night time? Not just after Isha, time right before the Fajr Salah, the time where most people are asleep. And there are very little preoccupations happening there. Okay. As well as the feeling of hunger. Right? Why? Because you don't feel your dependence on another thing more closely and like more easily available to you than this feeling of hunger. When you feel hunger, direct dependence towards something else is being felt by you, and you can't deny that, right? You're reminding yourself in this particular feeling that you're not an independent being. You are, in fact, a dependent one. further adds to the tawajjuh of man regarding his pre-existing top-down relationship. These were the two questions that I had been asked, and I thought they were interesting. I should share them with the group here. Does anybody have any other questions regarding the last session they would like to ask now before we continue? If you do, go ahead and do it. That's okay. Okay, let's continue. Okay, the worksheet we had given last session, many of you guys completed that and messaged that back to me. Thank you. Those of you guys that had done so before the day before yesterday, or before yesterday, sorry, I had seen most of them. I'd seen all of them actually. Okay. The only aspect of this particular worksheet I want to cover is that last portion that I had given, passage number 3, right? Wherein the munajat, the Imam says that my heedlessness has put to sleep my readiness to meet you. Okay. And he says that, but knowledge has awakened me to your generosity and boons. So I had asked 3 main questions. I said that, what does heedlessness, or how does heedlessness put to sleep your readiness to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Okay. What is ghafla, heedlessness? Well, we mentioned last that the inattentive capacities that man faces whilst not recognizing the pre-existing top-down relationship, well, that by definition is heedlessness. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is entirely qareeb, right? And this entirely qareeb friend of ours is just waiting for us to put aside the curtain of heedlessness so we can be within his presence and meet him, right? So the heedlessness that's being talked about here, right, the ghafla that's being talked about here that prevents that liqa from taking place, is that realization of the top-down pre-existing relationship that man already has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is it that relationship between the mother and the child that we talked about as well, right? But further than that, more important than that, and we talked about lam yalid wa lam yulad, right? The next aspect is that, what does the meeting really mean here? So we realize that by recognizing the top-down relationship, by being attentive towards that, we're meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, what does meeting Allah mean here? Well, meeting a physical entity, well, there was separation between the two, and one and the other were such that they would come and they'd meet and they'd be able to interact with another and so on and so forth, right? Right? So the meeting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is at the scale in which Allah exists. Meaning this meeting has no bound to it. The only bound then comes from the other party coming towards this particular meeting. Okay? And the other party coming towards this particular meeting is the nafs itself, us. Okay? So if I choose to make my meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala such that at the beginning of, let's say, my conversation with you today, I just made an intention saying that, oh, this conversation is for the sake of Allah, and that's it. Again, that was my tawajjuh in this 1 hour that I made. It was this, like how people sometimes make the niyat for salah, right? They make a niyat for salah just at the beginning, saying, I'm praying Fajr 2 rakats, qurbatan ilallah, Allahu Akbar. And the niyat portion, they assume it to be just that initial words that they say or speak out loud or repeat in their mind. Okay? Whereas the niyyah is something much greater than that. You're never devoid of your niyyah, and you're never devoid of your attentiveness. What you choose to be attentive towards is in your ikhtiyar, it's in your will, it's in your capacity. If I chose my realization of the top-down relationship to be like a label that I just place before each action, and that's it. And while I'm going through the action, I don't pay attention to the label anymore. While I'm let's say talking right now, teaching right now, playing with my kids, being with my spouse, so on and so forth. If that attentiveness towards Allah is just a label that I've placed, and I had that niyyah just beforehand, although better than no label, right? that's a very low level of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? It's like that niyat which exists in the beginning of that salat, right? And isn't something that is understood to be an actualization of the salat itself, really, right? So when I'm going into ruku and I'm going to sujood, that in of itself is a display of my niyyah, right? Attentively, I'm going to ruku towards my Rabb, and attentively, I'm going to sajda towards my Rabb. And my niyyah actually then is now played out by this salah, right? Similarly, my tawajjuh, it could be treated as just like a stamp or a title that I place or a sticker I place on my action, or I could realize this entirety of the action as the actualization of that niyyah, right? And a secondary meeting is maybe slightly higher in its effects. Okay. So last point was that what does the role of knowledge play in meeting Allah? Because the last line that I shared in this particular passage was, knowledge has awakened me to your generosity and boons. And if you notice, the word here is ma'arifah, not ilm, right? There's a difference between the two in the Arabic language, right? Arafah is knowing by means of understanding, and it's an internalized experiential meaning, not just a theoretical one. So this further emphasizes that, well, that which basically awakened me towards your generosity and allowed me to actualize that niyat in my actions, right, was now what? This arafah, this ma'arifah that I was facing, right? What was this ma'arifah based off of? Well, as I was experiencing existence in my 24 hours, as I was living about my day and having my deficiencies fulfilled, and me helping others and having my relationship with others and having my interaction with myself and those items and people around me, right? That in of itself, that interaction in of itself with existence, right, was something that I experienced, right? When I link that experience towards Allah and recognize that experience to be done by means of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then experientially I'm awakening myself to the things that He had given me and His continue to give me. His karam and His alaik. Okay? So a person going about their day in their interactions with their 24 hours, with the capacities that fill these 24 hours, then now by definition is progressing towards Allah by means of an experiential nature. It's no longer just a title you place before a drive home saying that I'm driving home from work, Qurbatan ila Allah. And then I drive home, and then the rest of the drive, there is no attentiveness towards Allah. Okay. This builds us into today's topic and today's meat of the discussion, really. We're going to look at a chart of apparent value and actual value, okay? And we're going to look at this particular chart in hopefully 3 scenarios, right? We're going to look at the top-down relationship, how it's seen in a child-parent relationship. We're going to see the top-down relationship, how it's seen in a husband-wife relationship, right? We're going to see the top-down scenario, how it's seen in the self and its achievements as well. The relationship between the self and its faculties and its accomplishments. So we have apparent good and actual good, right? These are the 2 things, and you see the top. Then we have apparent good and actual bad. And we have apparent bad and actual bad. And we have apparent bad and actual good. Okay. Every instance of existence that you interact with has 2 essential values. has a value in its appearance, right? That which commonly is seen and understood to be, right? And has this existential value for you as a person, with actualized value for you, right? So we're gonna let's explain this particular concept a little bit better. When that mother had an infant son, remember that example? And she was feeding that infant son, that infant, some milk and their food and so on and so forth. But there was a time where she'd stop feeding them and swaddle them and try to burp them. And the baby doesn't like that. The baby wants a continuous inflow of milk. The baby doesn't want to be separated from their milk, right? But the mother knows that even though this particular action for the baby seems an apparently not very nice thing to do, right? But it's required for them in their process of gaining this particular sustenance. Or if you have a baby who doesn't like their hands swaddled, right? The mother still knows that apparently, on the apparent aspect, this particular baby requires his hand to be swaddled because he'll scratch himself or there'll be other issues coming up. He might startle himself awake, right? But they'll swaddle the baby and then go about giving the baby the milk and giving the baby, putting them to sleep and so on and so forth, right? And the baby doesn't like to be swaddled. In the beginning, he might struggle and try to break from that swaddle and not be in that swaddle and so on and so forth. Well, in an actualized manner, a particular thing is good for the baby, although the baby doesn't recognize it. Okay. So what if somebody who loves that baby 70 times more than that mother? Okay. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, and He says in various manners, right? He calls the parents the Rabbayani Saghira, right? Meaning that He is the true Rabb. Then every instance of that particular creature's interactions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is designing it in a particular manner for the nourishment and the development of that particular creature. I mean, it's unfathomable for me and you to consider that mother would place her infant in a place where the infant loses out on something or gets hurt or gets into burns or something happens or some other issues happen with that particular child. It's unfathomable for us to consider a mother would harm, right? Just for the sake of harming her child. It's not a normal thing, right? That motherly love prevents that from happening. So if we see that the mother, if an infant is in the crib and the infant is crying and feeling that, well, I wanna be picked up, right? And the mother leaves him in the crib a little bit, sits beside him and rocks the crib instead of picking him up and giving him milk right away because that would calm him down, or giving a pacifier right away because that would calm him down. The mother's with her great love that she has for that infant, and that moment recognizing that the best thing for the child right now is to continue sleeping. That child needs this particular thing right now. They need this particular sleep. They're getting agitated and frustrated, not because of milk or diaper change, because I've just done that. They're becoming agitated because of lack of sleep. They need help going to sleep. The child doesn't recognize that. The child is upset and angry in that particular manner. Okay? So the one who loves us 70 times more than that, well, this Rabb of ours, the true Rabb, now creates our existence such that every capacity of it, every level of it, is designed by means of a single goal, right? We covered that goal last, which is for man to actualize and recognize the pre-existing top-down relationship, to become an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? For example, and this next example that I'm talking about it's an interesting one. Think about it. When you have a high school system and many people are graduating, hey, how come you graduated? That's not a normal question to be asked. We don't go up to my internet quality became a little bit low. That's why I turned my video off. I'll turn it back on once that internet quality goes a little bit higher again. If at any time my voice is cut off, please type or say something. You don't go up to somebody who's graduated from high school and say, hey, how come you graduated? Right? Because that's the norm. That's the expected result of that high school. That high school was designed in such a manner that if you showed up and you did the regular things and it was designed to produce people who've graduated. Right? You'd ask the people who flunked out or dropped out of this particular high school, hey, what happened? How come you failed? That question is a valid question for such people. Correct? So what is the system designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The system of existence designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses a relationship. So the high school also cares for their students, right? But that caring is significantly less than that of a mother towards her infant child. Okay, so now if we have a system of existence designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now, right? This system embodies every aspect in it such that that child can now graduate out of it, succeed in this particular system, the way the system required that person to succeed. Okay. In the case of the high school, that child might think that going to the most parties and making the most friends is success in high school, but the system doesn't understand that. The system says, no, that which is successful, if you were able to attain this GED and understand this information and be prepared for your next steps in university. Okay. The child might consider success in that particular high school to be popular and have friends and be and if that required them to maybe even be rude regarding certain individuals, or maybe not be the best that they could be in a particular class, the child might pursue that within their understanding and capacities, right? But the system says, we're designing in a very specific manner for you to achieve a very specific goal, right? You have to continue after high school. Your life will continue and you need to go to either university or college. And if you can't do either of those things, then you're going to be facing some pretty harsh realities for yourself. But this particular system is designed with very specific goal in mind, right? But whilst that's going on, it allows for the child to also be happy, also be participating in sports, participating in other activities, and so on and so forth, and extracurriculars, and so on and so forth. So what of the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also designed for us to graduate from this particular system. Right? This dunya of ours is designed by means, think of this dunya as a high school, really. This dunya of ours is it's a classroom that we've come into. Others came here before us and they left and they achieved whatever they've achieved right now. Now we find ourselves in this particular classroom and we're going about this particular classroom, and it's designed for a specific purpose at hand. Okay. And based on what we achieve in this particular classroom, in this particular high school of ours, right? The future that we determine for ourselves is determined by what we do now and here, right? Based on how attentive a person becomes regarding their pre-existing relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? How that manifests into their actions, because remember we said the pre-existing relationship and the attentiveness of it isn't like a sticker placed before a particular action. It's the manifestation of the action's entirety, like that salah, right? So you now come to the people who are in this particular high school and who are graduating from this. You should be asking the people that, hey, those who are failing this high school, you should ask them, hey, how come you're failing? Well, the system and everything within the system is designed in a manner for you to succeed. Okay. So this attention toward this aspect was important, that regarding the Qurb of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before we get into this chart that we just talked about, right? Our mindset has to be corrected and readjusted to fit the bill, really, right? We are created in this existence by the most Rahim Rabb, right? Who loves us more than the example he's shown us of the mother, right? And he's designed this system better than how a mother would design it for her infant, because he has more capacity than that of the mother, right? So he designed the system entirely in a manner that every person in their specific life, right, is given exactly that which they require towards achieving their GED. And their GED is what? The Qurb of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. And based on what they achieved in this particular life, right, the quality of Qurb they were able to achieve, the proximity they were able to achieve, they are now determining what happens to them after. Okay. So we have the scenario of some things that are apparently good. Like, let's say you have a good spouse. There's no baggage in that particular relationship. They're physically they're something that's appealing. They're respectful to. They're smart and so on. Mr. and Mrs. Perfect. On the apparent, when someone's looking at this particular relationship and the spouse says, "Well, this is a really good spouse," right? So this apparently good spouse is only good for me as a person if if this particular spouse causes within me, right, what? That attentiveness towards the pre-existing top-down relationship between Allah and myself. If this spouse is now a means for me to gain taqarrub towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, by means of loving her, by means of me spending time with her, by means of me recognizing this specialty that this spouse holds for me, right? If I can recognize that this spouse and this relationship, in fact, is a blessing, and then every experience I have in this relationship, as the relationship is developing, then so too is the relationship giver. My relationship with that relationship giver is also developing now. Okay? So as long as that's happening, this apparently good spouse is helping me in achieving my goal towards my existence, which was what? The Qurb of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. What happens if I have this Mr. or Mrs. Perfect as my spouse, but then I'm not attentive towards a top-down relationship? Well, what I've done is I've limited that relationship to just that physical, worldly level. Meaning that actions, those, let's say I lived 50 years in this world and I had this relationship for, let's say, with my spouse for 30 years of those 50 years of my life, right? Then I've limited that relationship to just that. That relationship serves nothing but the purpose of fulfillment of the now. Okay? And then when that Mr. or Mrs. Perfect, when I'm attentive towards them independently, then the one I start to go close to is now who? Well, I've considered them as the independent, right? They're my independently perfect spouse. When I start to develop a very intimate and strong relationship with my spouse, independent of Allah. Why is this a problem? We'll figure that out in a bit in our case scenarios. But this type of relationship is where the apparent is good, right? The apparent is in fact a blessing from Allah, but I haven't actualized that as a blessing yet. I've actualized it as a bad thing, really. And we talked last session about why there's no stagnancy. There's no middle ground. You're either going towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or you're moving away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no middle ground. So I refer you to your notes regarding the past session of why that is the case. Right? That's why this particular chart and the actualized level has a good and a bad. There's no middle. Either it's helping me progress towards my taqarrub of Allah, or that particular blessing is not helping me progress towards my taqarrub of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we come to the last aspect of this particular chart, the apparently bad, right, and the actually bad. So then I have a bad relationship, no respect, no love in that relationship, lots of baggage, right? Physically, I'm not attracted either, lots of issues. Basically, I'm married to Mr. or Mrs. Fir'aun. If above was Mr. or Mrs. Perfect, this is Mr. or Mrs. Fir'aun. Okay. Where the common person even looking at this relationship comes and says, "Oh, this is like, that's very difficult. You're in a very difficult relationship, very difficult situation." Okay. And if I'm not attentive of this particular relationship as also a means of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in its own manner, and I look at this relationship as an independent entity now, right? And I get involved in this relationship and lost in this relationship and the emotions of this relationship in an independent manner, right? Then this is actually bad for my person too. We'll look at that in the case studies in a bit. Then we have the apparently bad, right? Same scenario, Mr. and Mrs. Fir'aun. By this time, I've actualized that relationship, meaning that I've seen that this scenario, this situation that I find myself in, this is not beyond the scope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He hasn't put me in this particular scenario without a rope before me. Right? That if there was no rope and no chance of salvation, He hasn't put me in that particular scenario. It's beyond the capacity. Hayhat, it's not conceivable for somebody who loves me to the level that Allah loves me, for Him to put me in a situation, in a scenario that doesn't have a potential for my person to get closer to Him. In every existence, in every aspect of it, He's laid down a path towards Him. Okay, we'll look at some of those aspects in the case scenarios now. Let's look at the child-parent relationship. Okay, so you have the apparently good child, right? And you're actualizing that as a good child. So you have consider basically a child for yourself, and consider every aspect in which they've brought joy to you, including when you're holding them, when you saw them for the first time, or when you come back from work and they call out to you, or them showing their dependence on you, their need on you, if that gives you a sense of fulfillment and sense of pleasure, right? Or you seeing them be happy and you seeing them succeed and seeing them be at peace. Consider all aspects of that relationship, right? Now, in all aspects of that relationship, I could do just that. I could have that particular aspect. I could take that particular aspect and that particular thing that brought me pleasure and leave it at that. If I've left it at that and just enjoyed that particular aspect and that's it, then by my actions, I've made that particular action, that particular interaction, an independent action. There's no third of the two in that action. Okay. If I saw my kid and I held my kid and I kissed my kid and I was very happy, right? And in this particular action that I was having with my child, if I held my child and I kissed my child and it made me feel happy and this particular pleasure was given to me, right? The source of happiness was given to me by means of this child of mine. If I left it at that, then that instance, let's say it happens 8 times a day, 9 times a day. For every instance that I didn't actualize that action as a means of taqarrub, right? That's an opportunity lost. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He places a benefit for us, when He places us in an interaction with existence before us, He's asking for us to achieve something that will last longer than that limited action of this dunya. See, when I held that child in my hands and I kissed that child, that experience of pleasure was one which was felt for that 10 seconds. After that, I have the image of that pleasure in my mind. Next time when I hold a child, it's a new experience of pleasure I have now. Okay? That short-term experience of pleasure, Allah said that if you were able to have that short-term experience as a permanent thing, wouldn't you want it? Absolutely. That short-term experience and that pleasure that you're feeling, if you limit it to just the material realm in terms of its time and consider it as an independent entity and use up the resources that it has to offer, the experience that it has to offer on your person and say, I enjoyed it, alhamdulillah, wassalam, right? Then you've done that, you've just limited that particular interaction to just a dunya. Okay? At max, you achieved the pleasure of the dunya out of that. Whilst Allah has placed that particular interaction for you and your person, right, as a means for you to gain not only the pleasure of the dunya, of course, He's put a fitri need for us to gain that pleasure of the dunya, but by means of that, have a constant, real connection now towards the akhirah. Just like how when I hold that child and I'm experiencing that pleasure and I'm kissing that child, that experience that I have of kissing that child and happiness isn't just a hypothetical happiness, it's an actualized happiness. I'm fully attentive towards that happiness, right? The whole world can come and say, hey, you're not really happy. I could be like, what are you talking about? I feel it, right? Allah is saying that by means of that smaller step, come take the larger step too. By means of acquiring that smaller level of experiential knowledge, come take the higher level of experiential knowledge as well. And the pathway towards that is linking that lower level of experiential knowledge to the higher level of experiential knowledge now. So remember we talked about the quantitative measure and the qualitative measure. So the higher I'm able to now link my experiential knowledge now with this child, with the relationship that I have with this person towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The more attentive I can be now in this acquiring of happiness, I am not independent. He provided me with an offspring. He provided me with this love that I have for the offspring, such that I could gain this attention from the child, right? This now becomes an apparently good scenario with an actualized good as well. Okay. The second scenario I want to consider in the child-parent relationship is an apparently bad scenario, but how a person can actualize it as good. The two that I haven't covered, you guys can fill the chart for yourself in those. You have enough information from first session and after the completion of this session to be able to fill the other two aspects that I didn't cover now, which would be what? The apparently good and the actually bad, right? And the apparently bad and the actually bad. Okay. So the apparently bad scenario, the kid is, now my child is rowdy and not happy with me, and child has grown up and now they've maybe developed certain habits and certain things to them that are not very nice, that they might not even pray now, they might have some other issues going on with them and so on and so forth, right? On the apparent, anybody's saying with aql will look at that, aql would come and look at that scenario and say, this is a bad scenario to be in, right? Okay. Me as a person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed me in that situation, hasn't left my hands. It's not the case that he's now left me on my own and said, good luck. It's you and this child and I'm out of here. No, rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed me even in that situation, right, as a means of getting closer to him. Now, I might have found myself in that situation because of my own mismanagement. So when it came time for my kids' tarbiyah from the time of 0 to all the way to 7, right, before something was actually occupying their time, like school and so on and so forth, I filled it up with absolute garbage. I gave them an iPad, TV, whatever. I just basically was trying to make them, training them really to go on autopilot mode, right? If I spent the kids 0 to 7 in an attempt to, without realizing it, training my kids how to be the greatest autopilot mode people, right? Then I can't expect other than that when they're out of that age of 7. I've trained them to be the best person on autopilot mode, and now they've actualized it. Okay, I've given them the iPad, I've given them the TV, I've given them lack of attention, I've given them what they wanted, and made them into these creatures who are basically just looking out for their own success, right? And when that is actualized and that is manifested at the level of the teenage years, right, will that manifest in a very different way. Now they don't want candy and they don't want TV, right? Now they want something else, right? And that something else is something that I don't want to provide to them, right? It's not good for them. I didn't recognize that candy and TV wasn't good for them either. In this stage, though, society has opened my eyes enough to the fact that this particular thing I can't give even one iota of. Candy and TV, I had to give certain aspects of it to them. That was okay, that was fine, that was healthy. But now when they get to their teenage years, because they've developed their shahwat to this point, I've mismanaged certain things. Now I can't even give them a drop of this thing that they're asking for because it's haram, it's bad. It's existentially going to corrupt them. Okay. In certain scenarios, a person might find that they've set themselves up for those bad measures. They've set that well that they find themselves in. They've dug it up. In other scenarios, that well is dug for them. Right? Let's take the example of Nabi Nuh alayhi salam. Clearly, Nabi Nuh, being a Masum, didn't dig his own well. Right? That well was dug for him by means of his environment, by means of his spouse, by means of his others, aqraba, and so on and so forth, who had a relationship with his child such that they could influence the child. Okay? Whether it be scenario A or B, whether you've dug your own hole or somebody else has dug it for you, once you're in that particular place now, Allah hasn't left you. Right? That particular scenario itself has a requirement from you. There's a pathway even in that for you to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You would determine that if that particular scenario is something that is by means of your person, first and foremost, the realization that you caused that is a great blessing from Allah. Because you're already far ahead of yourself, the version of yourself who didn't realize that they had made a mistake. The first step towards fixing a mistake is the realization that something was a mistake. Okay? So that regret or that upsetness that you feel, right? True, you have to live up with that just desserts of that. You have to, but at the end of the day, your kid isn't going to miraculously change because you recognize your mistake. No, but your spiritual development continues. Okay. Even in that particular scenario, you're not living vicariously through your kids. You are developing yourself as long as you are alive in every stage of it. Okay. I've made some mistakes, and now my kid has found himself in a bad position, and I find myself at the bottom of a well that I've dug, right? That realization that I dug this well brings about regret, and then that particular regret in of itself is the first step towards being attentive towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And I use that particular regret, and I go towards this concept of jubran. That within my capacity now, what do I have the power? So this love, this taqarrub that I have of Allah, I want to get out of this world. I want to get closer and closer to Allah. I don't want to be in this particular world that I've dug for myself. I want to be more and more attentive towards a pre-existing top-down relationship that I have with my Rabb. My Rabb natured for me and cared for me and catered for me and didn't make mistakes in his rububiyyah. I made mistakes in my smaller rububiyyah, right? The realization of that mistakes comes out as astaghfar first and foremost. In terms of what? Astaghfar means I'm repentant towards that. I actually feel in my person a bad feeling that I made those mistakes. I feel that regret, right? I can't fake regret. I feel it. And in that feeling of regret, I've now taken the first step. The second step is to thank Allah now in providing that particular feeling of regret and showing me that, wow, I did dig a well for myself. Right? If you thank Allah in something and you are thankful regarding something, Allah will increase you in that manner. If I thank Allah in my progress towards Him, that even though I have dug myself in a well, but the fact that He opened my eyes and took me out of my days and showed me that, hey, I'm actually in a well right now, I have to progress forward. Right? That realization, whenever it occurs, and as many times as it occurs, that realization is an opportunity provided to me by Allah. That opportunity needs to be thanked. Now that opportunity also needs to be realized in my actions too. So if there are certain things that I can change in my parenting style, which will take me out of that particular well and make me now not a bad Rabb for my child, right? And I go towards that. That is called jubran. And if I don't have that, if I don't have that opportunity, that well was not dug by me, was dug by something else, someone else, and I find myself in the position of Nabi Nuh, seldom are we in that position. But if we find ourselves in that particular position, and again I emphasize seldom, very rarely are we in that particular position, then even in that particular position, Allah hasn't left my hands alone. Okay? If my interaction with that child was one of where Allah was a third of the two, then my relationship with that child develops exactly as that. When that child now in this situation is now coming and making mistakes and causing problems and creating trouble, right? And I'm not happy, and it's not due to me that he's doing it or she's doing it, right? Allah hasn't left my hand here either. There exists within even this scenario a path for me to grow closer to him. But one very small aspect is that if a person, so there's multiple angles to analyze here. So the person's intellect, based on how their internal inclinations are, can use this as an opportunity to be thankful of a past blessing. Okay. To be thankful of the fact that, for example, how they had their parents and how they were towards that parents, right, might have been different towards how their child is towards them. Right? This is one inclination a person might have, where they start a comparison. That's okay, as long as it's used in the correct manner. As long as that particular tawajjuh is leading you towards Allah at its own level, it's going to help you, right? Might not be the most ideal scenario in that particular time to start comparing in your mind. But so you're trying to get towards the taqarrub of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by means of any experiential experience you have with existence. A second aspect is how the Imam alayhi salam talks about in his dua. When there's a dua for parents in Sahih al-Hajjali. The parents recite this dua for their children. And there's a hadith as well that talk about basically the outlook of a worried parent towards their child. Okay. If really you are not at play and that child of yours is now becoming adu of Allah, the enemy of Allah, right? And you've tried you're not at fault. You don't think I tried your best. You're claiming now that you're at the position of Nabi Nuh. And I said it's seldom the case. 99.9999% of the time we're in the other scenario that we talked about, where the thing was controllable and you've dug that hole for yourself. Okay. But in this small scenario that the hole was dug for you, then you embody the meanings that are in those particular du'as, those particular ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, which talk about what? They say that a person came to the Imam and said that, well, I'm really worried about my child. And so the Imam said, well, your child is either one of two things. Either he's an abd of Allah or he's an adu of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he's an abd of Allah, don't worry, Allah has taken care of your child. Okay, that cause of worry is a negative suffering. You're creating worry for yourself. That's not actualizing in action. It's actualizing in your own degradation. If that abd of Allah if that child of yours is an abd of Allah, Allah is taking care of his ibad. If that child is an adu of Allah, right, and not listening to you and going against your command of coming towards Allah, even though you've done that from the beginning, you're claiming to be in the position of Nabi Nuh. Remember that point. You're claiming right now that this scenario is only for that 0.00001% scenarios, right? If that's the case and your child is adu of Allah, then why are you caring so much about the adu of Allah? If that child is now turned into the enemy of Allah, then why are you caring and considering so much about the enemy of Allah? Okay. This top-down relationship that we have with Allah, allowing Allah to be the third of the two, is an extremely important idea. It's extremely important reality that we need to embody. It's something that's found within almost every aspect of our deen. Okay. When Nabi Nuh was speaking to Allah about saving his child, right? And Allah says, no, I will not save him, right? The Nabi didn't take the side of the child and start an argument with Allah. What did the Nabi do? He recognized the experiential knowledge that he had regarding his relationship with Allah, meaning that even in the relationship between the Nabi and his child, Allah was the third of the two, right? And this third of the two was the independent, where everything else, all other relationships, all other faculties, and all other beings were in fact linked to that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that particular entity. Okay. So we take this example of the parent-child relationship. We recognize now, nearing the end of today, we weren't able to cover much. My fault. I apologize for that. We covered the main topic, which was this apparently good and actually good, and apparently bad and actually bad, right? But I wanted to show you guys the display of that in certain relationships. We covered one relationship. I'll cover certain aspects of it in a brief manner regarding another relationship that a person can have, right? And we'll culminate the session there. If people have questions, they can ask then. If you want to leave, the session will end at 9:30, inshallah. Okay. I'll try to start the question and answering at 9:30 as I told before. Okay. So we have now a relationship that's external to us that we discussed, the relationship between a child and parent. We were going to also look at the relationship between the husband and wife, right? I'll write certain aspects and I'll send that as a passage to consider after the class, I guess, right? But then there's also faculties of the internalized aspects too, the relationship between man and himself. Okay. In my person, I have certain achievements. My achievements start from my physical existence, my intellectual capacities, my spiritual capacities. Okay. My physical capacities, I've gained some things. I've either have a fit body, physically I'm youthful, physically I'm healthy, right? Materially, I have a lot of wealth. Materially, I have a house. Now, these things, if you notice, there's a difference here. The materially have a house and materially have wealth, they're the achievements of the self that are not in the self, right? They're the achievements of the self by means of takathur, by means of having multiplicity, like adding to themselves externally, okay? So whether you consider that notion of the addition of to yourself on the external manner by means of achievements of the self, meaning what? Now, having a car, having a house, having a job, creating a masjid, being a school teacher, creating Islamic content, creating whatever, external to your person. That could be an achievement of yourself. And then you have an internal achievement of the self, which deals with your physical capacity. Now, your health is very different from achieving a car, right? Your strength that you have and the youth that you have is very different from achieving, let's say, a house, right? So the achievements can be now discussed and two levels too. One is the level of an externally achieved thing, like houses and so on and so forth, and an internally achieved thing, like internal capacities of a person, ranging from the physical realm to the intellectual to the spiritual, right? A person going through his 24 hours and experiencing that which they have, the way they view this, the way they actualize this, and the way they understand these capacities to exist has to be in a manner that is taking Allah into consideration at the very least. Meaning that Allah has to be the third of the two there as well. But there's me and my health, but my health is not a permanent aspect of me. There are times when I'm sick. There's me and my youth. My youth is not a permanent aspect of me. There's a time where I will lose it and a time I didn't have it. Okay. There's me and my intellectual capacity and understanding. Well, there's times when I forget things and I don't understand things as quickly as I should. Okay. And there's also this idea of me and my taqarrub towards Allah. Even in that taqarrub towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am not looking at that as an independent relationship. Even in that, Allah is a third of the two. Okay? By actualizing this particular concept that Allah is the third of the two in my experiences, right? And linking it to the experience. The experience itself now is the manifestation of that particular concept, right? So now each experience, there's no repetition here now. So each experience of, for example, if you have a pizza before you and you eat one bite of the pizza, right? You don't say, well, eating the rest of the pizza is repetition. No, you continuously eat until you're full. Because each bite of that particular pizza is not a repetition. Each bite is now giving you something that you were lacking before, right? Until you feel fulfillment. Well, each interaction, each actualization of this particular tawajjuh of Allah as a third of the two in your 24 hours is in fact creating for you that qualitative and quantitative measure of growth. It's creating for you that taqarrub. It's making you actualize in your person, in your experience, that you are an entirely dependent creature. So the idea of having Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the third of the two, right? And knowing that He is the one that gives us the fulfillment of our deficiencies, and He is the one that gives us the achievement of our persons, right? Is an extremely important thing. Knowing it in our mind is one thing. That's equivalent to putting a label on a glass, right? So the equivalent of niyat before the salah, just the words that we say. Knowing in the mind is one thing, right? But we want to now actualize it and be attentive towards it throughout the action now, at whatever capacity we can. That's a completely different ballgame. Okay? Both in their own aspects are allowing for the qurb of Allah. One is allowing for the qurb of Allah in terms of the presence of the mind, and the second is allowing for the qurb of Allah in the presence of the heart. Both are needed. It's true, one precedes the other. The presence of the mind precedes the presence of the heart. But both are needed in this particular qurb towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll end the content section of this particular course now, right? And I'll open up the things that I've said so far. Are there questions regarding this particular concept that you guys have? Our class is supposed to finish at 9:45. We have 15 minutes. Are there questions that you have regarding this particular concept? No. Okay. I'll use 10 minutes of my time now to talk about the last aspect that I really wanted to touch up upon. So what's the effects of having this qurb of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do I know that I'm actually getting this qurb in my life? Okay. Well, let's see it in the interactions. So let's take the interaction. Let's take the scenario that we covered, the parent-child scenario, right? When I have now, let's say, when I have that interaction with my child, when I have that interaction with that child, right? If I see Allah as a third of the two, then all of a sudden my interaction with the child is not that of the independent. So when my interaction with the child was as of the independent, meaning that when that child obeyed me, then I considered myself as the authority, and I felt that, well, I was the Rabb of this child. I was the independent in this particular relationship, and that child has disobeyed me, and that causes anger within me, right? And then I rebuke them based on my anger, right? Sometimes if people are looking, I might rebuke them a certain way, and when no one's looking and I am alone with them, I might rebuke them a different way. That's a very dangerous sign. Very dangerous sign if a person starts to attach themselves as the independent in that relationship. Right? When they see that parent-child relationship, Allah is the third of the two. What ends up happening is that the only aspects that they try to embody within that relationship, the only means of correction they try to embody within that particular relationship are the means that bring for that person now the qurb of Allah. That pathway which Allah has allowed for me. He has not allowed me to hit the child in this particular manner. He has not allowed me to yell at the child and put the child down in this particular manner. He has not allowed me to display my anger and cause fear in the child. Okay. So when Allah is a third of the two, and that interaction now is one where taqarrub is taking place, if it's actualized, because remember, shaitan's best effort is to make sure that he fools you. He makes you think that you have this taqarrub while you don't. Litmus test in the action. Okay? When I'm interacting with that particular child, right? If I'm God conscious and I'm conscious, attentive of the fact that my actions, even at that type of upsetness, are within the boundaries and constraints that Allah has placed for me, right? If I'm attentive of that fact, if Allah is present in my reaction, okay, then perhaps I'm stepping closer and closer to Him. I can claim now that at least in this one interaction, I had the tawajjuh towards Allah. How did I find out? When that cup swirled, when that anger happened, and that child caused something that caused an upsetness inside me, my immediate reaction, my reactions toward that, my emotional interaction with that child, if it was one that looked at that child only as mine and I was the independent and I reacted how I wished, then Allah is not the third of the two here. Okay. The same thing goes with the relationship with the spouse. When things go sour and things aren't working out and there's ups and downs in a relationship, the exact same scenario plays there. The exact same scenario plays in your internalized capacities too. If I've been able to achieve something, physical fitness, and this gives me pleasure, but if this pleasure is limited to me, and I don't consider that this particular pleasure is owed to, a thanks is owed to other than me, right? It's me and my gym and my capacities, and now this physical fitness that I've gained, this particular intellectual capacity that I've gained, this salah that I'm able to read, this particular attentiveness and intellectual capacity that I'm able to achieve, right? If I don't feel within my person that existential need, that thanks is owed, right? If I don't even feel that in my existence, and this feeling is a very true feeling, right? You can't hide this feeling. Right? If that feeling isn't found within my person, something is wrong. And I'm not taking Allah to be the third of the two, right? I'm still stuck in that initial phase of the presence of the mind, where I know that I should be creating this relationship, but I haven't actually formed it yet. My tawajjuh hasn't reached its quantitative and qualitative measure yet. What happens when you've reached that a certain level of quantitative and qualitative measure is that at every instance of your interaction then, right, at whatever capacity you've reached, you don't consider yourself as an independent there. Your interaction with harsh things or sweet things, neither of those things are you somebody who is independent, enjoying that, or you're repelling that. In both of those scenarios, whether it be the enjoying of something or the repulsion of something in your 24 hours, right? You existentially feel your dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Something you can't lie about, something you can't joke about, something you can't make up. It's like that feeling of hunger, right? Because it's an experiential knowledge, you could be, all we could do in this session is place for you the place where the experience is found. The experience can't be transferred. We were attempted to do that by these two sessions. Provide for you the place where that experience can be found and the means by which that experience can be created. So if I was to teach you how to be hungry, for example, right? I would tell you to go to exercise, and I would tell you to stop eating food. And I say this feeling that you care about after you do these two things, this feeling is now something that we call hunger. Okay, we've tried to do something very similar here. We've tried to place for you the position where the taqarrub of Allah takes place. It's an experience that a person feels. Okay? Attentiveness, tawajjuh towards his Rabb, actualized in his actions throughout them, where the action is nothing but that at one level. So we end the session here today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them or message them or email them to me. If not, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows these sessions as a means of getting closer to Him and not as a means of a wasted resource. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajal faraj.
Yeah, I had a question, if you don't mind.
Please.
At the end here, you mentioned that we've tried to develop a place where, so my question was like, how do we start seeing that we're becoming attentive to Allah? In the majority, at the beginning, inshallah, in the majority part of our 24 hours, right? Or how, or frequently in our 24 hours.
When you notice that in your 24 hours, let's say you're going for a drive, or you're sitting here talking to me. While you're talking to me, while you're going for a drive, if you're not aware of a presence other than yours, and you're kind of caught up in just the moment itself, right? Then for sure there's no third of the two being actualized. Because remember, we talked about this relationship as that realization of a pre-existing top-downs. Allah is always there, right? So when he's not there for you, that means that you have not actualized that down-up relationship. So right now when I'm talking to you, as I'm speaking these words, if I, for at whatever level, am not considering Allah's dependence, Allah's independence and my dependence on him, right? At whatever level I'm not considering that, he's not there for me there. My down-up relationship is lacking in that regards. It could be at one level of me just using this laptop and talking to you. Now in that I'm dependent on Allah. It could be further than that. It could be the formation of my ideas. If I'm attentive that even in this, I'm not dependent. Right?
Sure.
So the presence of Allah is actualized by your attentiveness towards him.
Okay. So the next question that I have is like, how do we start creating opportunities for ourselves to become more attentive towards him?
Okay. So the system has already done that for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave existence this exact goal. So your life and my life is hardwired, hard-tuned to give us opportunities for us to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be attentive towards him. Okay. It starts off by my mental capacity to now see and link things to him. See, it required a mental attention from me to link the fact that this laptop is a creature of Allah, is an existence that it doesn't have independence on its own. There was a time it didn't exist, how it exists, right? And there might be a time it might not exist. And I am a creature of Allah. And by means of using an existence, right, I'm able to transfer some information to you. That information is also a creature of Allah, right? It required a mental awareness, right? But when that mental awareness is practiced in my 24 hours, and as it's practiced, right, that mental awareness creates from me now the malakeh, the capacity now to what? To actualize it more frequently and an easier level. In the start, it requires a lot of effort, right? In the start, it requires a lot of attention, right?
So just this like, we have to practically put this out, though.
Yeah, you have to practically now. It's like driving that manual car. In the beginning, you're so attentive of that gear shift, right? And without looking at the gear shift, you can't change from 1 to 2 because you don't, like, you're not sure. Okay. So in the beginning, it's a very much mentally focused practice, right? It's like that gear shift. But once you start to drive this manual car and you are consistently attentive towards this, right? An avid person, when they're driving a manual car, they don't even think anymore. Their hands are moving. Okay. So this presence of the mind is the starting position. It's the place that allows for this concept to seep into your presence of the heart. And then the presence of the heart is one which you actualize. This presence of the mind, the starting gears for this journey, is something that requires a lot of attention. It requires regular attentiveness, right? And that attentiveness is played throughout your 24 hours. That's the quantitative measure that I was talking about, right? The quantitative measure is exactly that. That in my day, I was only able to be attentive 5% of it. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to try to achieve a little bit higher than that. At least in the quantitative measure, I'm going to increase that relationship. Okay. As the quantitative measure increases, because I'm a person and I have intellect, my capacity will automatically allow for the qualitative measure to increase too. Okay. My life is designed in a way, like the high school was designed in a way for people to graduate from it. This dunya and my life, every aspect, that bookshelf you have beside you, that background you have, that chair you're sitting on, this particular thing that I have on, Allah has hardwired existence as a means of getting close to Him. The limiting agent is my capacity in my person. Right? This thing I've put on me is a means of retaining warmth for my body because I feel sick, right? Okay. This retainment of warmth, if I attribute to this blanket as an independent entity and I'm not attentive towards the fact that actually, even in this retainment, this blanket isn't Allah, na'uzubillah, right? The effect in giving that effect, this blanket isn't independent, right? By being attentive of that, I'm using this blanket, but at the same time, Allah is a third of the two in me using this too. So I find myself now on a journey where I'm never alone. In every interaction with existence, even with the interaction with my person, Allah is the third of the two.
Okay.
Was I able to answer your question?
You did. Yeah, thank you.
Is there any other questions that anybody has?
I don't have a question, but I maybe, just want to add to what brother said. Okay, this is my son's name. Okay, this is Shabana. Okay, I feel dua plays a lot of role in this. If you ask Allah for it, He will definitely grant you it. He will show you ways how you can get connected to Him. Especially, as you have the dua of Allahumma arifni nafsak. You're asking Allah to introduce Himself to you. So you will sometimes, you will actually see the hand of Allah in everything. And you will realize that this, whatever I'm getting is maybe through a sabab, but it is actually Allah who's doing it for me. And, you start developing that experiential knowledge, whatever you meant to say, I feel. And you start thanking Allah for the thing, not the sabab. Like, He's the source of the bounty. So that's what I feel.
So alhamdulillah, that's a very, very good point that you mentioned, sister, that these du'as, in fact, are exactly that, right? Allah has given oxygen to everybody, but the taqarrub of Allah isn't given to everybody. There are certain things that Allah has given to people without them asking for it, but there are certain existences, certain capacities that Allah gives only to those that have asked for it. That asking can be by means of the mouth, by meaning, oh Allah, please give me X, Y, and Z. And then that asking can be manifested in the action too. When you're trying to be attentive towards Allah in your 24 hours, this is the manifestation of your dua. Dua is extremely important. And the words of the dua are extremely important. Allahumma arifni nafsak is actually manifested by what we've taught here today. Oh Allah, allow me to see you in every existence. When I'm actually trying to now be attentive of Him and the pre-existing top-down relationship, I am living that dua now. Right? That dua is now a verbal manifestation of my life status, which is good, which is exactly how it's supposed to be. The dua is extremely important once lived. Right? Are there any comments? There's a chat. Somebody has written something. Oh, there is no next session. This was designed as a 2-session course. Inshallah, we'll finish it at this point. Jazakallah. May Allah allow you guys to grow in your development towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please forgive me for my limitations in the capacity of transferring of knowledge and information. And pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases both your capacities and mine in getting closer to Him. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Fi aman Allah.